Morning everybody, and this is another camera review, and this is my recent acquisition. It's a Minolta CLE which was produced from 1980 to 1985, and it actually follows on from the success of the Leica CL, which was also badged the Lights Minolta CL or the Minolta CL, and that camera was produced from 1973 to 1976, and it was a collaboration between Leica and Minolta. Leica designed the Leica CL and they had Minolta produce it for them, and the idea was to produce a small compact camera to use the Leica M mount lenses, and that's what they did, and it was very successful. It was a mechanical camera, and after the demise of the Leica CL, Minolta went on to further develop this camera, the CLE, which stands for Compact Leica Electronic, because this one uses an electronic timed shutter and offers aperture priority exposure, not just manual, and it has through the lens metering as well. I'm going to go over the features and controls and show you where the settings are, etc. And starting from the bottom, so that's where you fit the battery. You've got a little cover here. You just flip that open, and you've got there's two. If you flip the cover further, you can see the second battery, but I'll not open it because it might pop out. You've got two SR44s or LR44 batteries, which is powered by. Just close up the cover again, and after you've fitted the batteries, or at any time, you can check if the battery's okay by pressing in this little button that says BC on it, and you press that in, and it lights up the LED on the front to show you that the batteries are okay. You've got a tripod socket here. You've got a film sprocket release button for rewinding the film at the end. You just press that in, releases the sprocket so you can rewind the film, and that's via this rewind crank and lever here, which unusually is on the bottom rather than on the top. You flick this from the back and you can then pull it up, and to open the film back door you turn it in the direction of the arrow and it flips open the back, and you can insert a film in here, and what you do is you put the leader in from this end into one of the slots there, ensuring the hole in the film engages on that little catch there before advancing it, firing a shot, and then you can shut the back again. You can then take up any slack on the rewind crank by turning the direction of the arrow. Looking on the back, very little on the back at all. You've got a holder for the piece of carton of the film to show you you've got a film fitted and what ASA speed it is. You've also got the viewfinder, which is one of the most important things on a rangefinder camera. You don't see through the lens, you see through a window, and in the centre you get a rangefinder patch, which is using through this window here, and that's used for focusing, so you focus with the patch so you see a solid image in the centre of the viewfinder. It's easier when you're looking at it yourself rather than trying to explain it. Also through the viewfinder you see other things that are important. You see the frame lines for the lens. As I say, you're not looking through the lens, so you need a frame line so you can judge what you can actually get on film, and they are parallax corrected as well, so as you focus the lens the frame lines adjust in the viewfinder accordingly, so it represents what you should get on film, and the frame lines change depending on what lens you've got fitted. This one's designed with 28, 40 and 90mm frame lines. On the left hand side of the display you see a LED which lights up against one of the shutter speeds, which shows you what the camera is going to set when you're in aperture priority mode, and these settings are steplessly controlled by the camera, but it will show you roughly what shutter speed it's going to set from half a second up to 1/1000th of a second, but in reality the camera can set shutter speeds from 15 seconds up to 1/1000th of a second. So looking at the top plate, you've got the frame counter, that's resets to S when you open the back. You've got the film advance lever, which also cocks the shutter of course, and you've got a shutter dial, and in the centre of the shutter dial is the shutter button, which is a sensitive button. Basically you just lightly touch it and you see the display in the viewfinder what shutter speed the camera is going to set in aperture priority mode, and then when you fully press the button it takes the shot, of course. The shutter dial, you have in the centre a ASA speed setting, which obviously you would adjust first after fitting the film, and you do that by lifting up the shutter dial and you can adjust it to what film you've got fitted. The shutter dial itself is locked on A, which is aperture priority, so basically you set the aperture on the lens. On this M-Rocker 40mm lens, the aperture ring is on the front, and you can go from f2 all the way to f16 in half click stops, which is obviously a boom because it sets the shutter speed automatically. It lets you give more precise control over the shutter speed. If you want to release the shutter dial to manual setting, you press in this little button here, and you press in that button and it releases the lock, so you can set manually from B, which is bulb setting, from 1 second all the way up to 1/1000th of a second. Now when you've got it on these settings you don't see any metering at all through the display, so you'd have to either use a external light meter or take a reading in aperture priority mode and then set a manual shutter speed yourself. But to say it's not manually controlled, it's still an electronic shutter. And you might think, well, why would you want to do that? It's basically if you want more control over the exposure, or if you want more than plus or minus 2 stops, you would have to take a reading and then set it manually on the aperture and the shutter speed dial. In aperture priority mode you've got some control over exposure from -2 up to +2 stops by setting the A against those settings, and they go in half click stops as you can see, but the dial does lock in the centre spot, which is for aperture priority metering. Looking on the top plate you also have the hot shoe, which is actually a hot shoe, and there is a dedicated flash for this camera called the Minolta CLE. The lens, you can see, has a focusing ring on the bottom here, which is in a lovely position when you're holding up the camera to your eye. That's in a perfect position for focusing. Now the camera itself can focus down to 0.75 meters, but obviously that depends on the lens, and I think this lens focuses down to 0.8. Oh, it's actually just slightly less than 0.8 meters. But the minimum distance of the camera is actually 0.75 meters. The metering, as I say, in aperture priority mode, it actually uses through the lens metering. And if I remove the lens, just pressing this little catch here and turn it anti-clockwise, the lens comes off. So obviously it's like M mount, and what happens is, depending on the shutter speed, it either reads the light through the lens off the shutter curtain bounced to the metering cell, which is in the bottom. That's at fast shutter speeds from 1/25th of a second up to 1/1000th of a second. If the shutter is below that, if it's 1/60th of a second or below, then it reads some of the light off the film during the actual exposure, and depending on the shutter speed, the slower the shutter speed, the more it reads the light off the film rather than the shutter curtain. Difficult to explain, but that's basically how it works. Also looking on the front here, you've got the power control, and if it's set, this little switch, if it's set next to the arrow, the camera is switched off. You can't use the electronics at all, or you can't fire the shutter. To switch the camera on into normal mode, you push this little switch across slightly to the left and then down, twishes it on, which activates ready for the meter when you press the button, and obviously the shutter is then controllable as well. It's also got a self timer. You can flick it up and you can cock the shutter. As you can see, the second curtain on the shutter also has the same pattern in, so you can meter either with the film the shutter cocked or not. So in self timer mode it counts 10 seconds, you press the button and obviously you get a LED which flashes, for 10 seconds before it takes the shot, and obviously you can use the aperture priority mode in that as well. Just wait for the shutter to fire. Very quickly that fired, obviously. Put the lens back on. Just line up the red dot with the arrow there, and you can turn the lens. Just to compare it with a normal, what you call a normal film camera, which is an SLR camera. This is compared in size to the FM3A. You can see it's quite a bit smaller, especially in depth, and it weighs quite a lot less as well. If you think the FM3A is not a full professional camera, if you consider it to have an F3 or an F4 etc., then it would make the CLE a lot smaller. But you can see it's smaller and lighter than that, so that's the beauty of these rangefinder cameras. And this FM3 is fitted with a 40mm lens as well to give you the same comparison. Say there is, Minolta do make their own 28 and 90mm lenses for this camera, which obviously work perfectly through it. And apparently these M-Rocker lenses are sharper and better than the Leica equivalent Summicron, apparently. So I can't justify if that's true or not. But this is I try to make sure I got the later version of this lens. There's two versions actually. This is the later version. The early version has the serial number around the front of the lens, whereas this one tells you the filter size, 40.5mm, and it has the serial number on the barrel. And this later version is multi-coated, where the early version was single-coated. So that's something to look out for if you're after that lens. So there you go, that's a nice look at the Minolta CLE camera. I hope you've enjoyed this review. Sorry for the interruption in the middle, and I hope to catch you soon. Bye for now.